Okay, so today's topic is going to be about EDRs, specifically Linux EDRs, and mostly we will talk about what exactly is an EDR, what are its building blocks, how it is implemented, what are the types of data it collects, how it collects that data, the types of analysis that is performed by EDR, and then we will have a look into certain blind spots in whole EDR design, and then we will look into how we can exploit those blind spots to perform some sort of defensive agent. So today's session is going to be first lecture in this series, and today we will be mostly covering about, we will be talking about mostly overview of all the building blocks and general the techniques that are employed. From next session, we will be dealing with a bunch of C++ code, bunch of deep dive into specific techniques to see why exactly it becomes a blind spot, how we are going to exploit it, and why exactly the whole thing works the way it works. Today, we are not going to delve into any code or any special demo for that matter. Today, we are going to only cover mostly overview of this whole series and all the stuff that we are going to uncover in upcoming sessions. So maybe some of you already know me. For those who don't, I am a security researcher. I used to be independent security researcher, but then I joined a job as a security researcher. So right now I am working at a company called Optics, which makes EDR for cross-platform stuff. And I mostly deal with malware side of things, offensive and defensive both, specific to Linux. In my free time, I tend to write bunch of C++ just to scratch my own itch. And I used to love to present in meetups and conferences before Corona, and then Corona happened. In my personal life, I am very much fond of Linux and all that free and open source software stuff. So if you want to reach me, my email ID is given here. The response may get delayed, so please maintain some patience, but eventually I will get back to you. So this is today's agenda. We will start with the definition of EDR. We will talk about its general capabilities, the different mechanisms to implement the said capabilities, and then we will get into specific EDR techniques about its visibility, how detections are performed, how prevention is performed, where we will talk about various blocking techniques that are used by EDR. Then we will talk about various blind spots, and then we will cover some overview of some simple blind spots and how to exploit them. And with that, today's lecture will be basically over. So this is the definition of EDR. That is basically integrated endpoint security solution. We can call it granddaddy of antivirus. Integrated because it performs real-time continuous monitoring and continuous data collection analysis, just like kind of antivirus. It performs anomaly detection that is slightly different from traditional antiviruses, and then the response is mostly semi-automated. Now, the difference between an antivirus and EDR is mostly the scope of visibility. An antivirus is generally limited to certain set of events, and generally it is limited to one particular endpoint at a time. In an EDR, we collect data from all the endpoints which are connected with the EDR, and then we pull them at some place and we analyze all that data together. And by doing this, we are able to uncover certain complicated attacks. For example, if there is an attacker which is performing, say, pivoting to jump from one VLAN to another VLAN, or there is some lateral propagation via some sort of internal tunneling, so that sort of data can be correlated. Similarly, if you see that certain malicious activity has been spotted on one particular system, then you can reverse match that activity on all other systems to see if something similar happened in past or not. And then you can query live status of all the systems, what your events are offering. You can probably query those events. You can run certain ad hoc analysis on that data, and so on. Now the response part is mostly has three parts. One is blocking, second one is containment, third one is notification. So in blocking, we basically block the process completely. And now there are various ways. There are ways where you simply kill the process. There are ways where you simply block the particular system call or function, all depending upon the way it is implemented. Containment is where you limit the access. For example, a certain EDR product may try to limit file system exposure to certain process to certain part of file system instead of letting it see entire file system attached to the system. Notification is basically you just get an alert that this particular activity has happened, but there will not be any blocking or containment unless you choose to do so manually. Generally, it is centrally monitored and controlled. All endpoints have a small agent process that collects all the data and passes it to your centralized monitoring system or server. Sometimes there may be kernel level drivers, sometimes there may be binaries at middleware level. Data is analyzed at central base. The analysis can be either rule based, like you can write a rule saying that if a bash shell spawns from a web server, give me an alert. Or it may be statistical analysis based on, say, you can figure out somewhere to figure out that, okay, this activity is repeated too many times on too many endpoints. So this is probably not worth noticing, but this one is something that sticks out. So based on that, or you can take it one step further and you can probably deploy some sort of machine learning model to go through the data and flag some anomaly. Now, the capabilities include real-time system tracing, memory analysis, anomaly detection, use case creation, integration with other services, and there are various parts of all these capabilities. For example, if we talk about the real-time system tracing, there is process execution. For example, whenever a new process is created, it will get an event data saying that this particular process has been started, this was the parent, this is the current login user, this is the active user, this is the effective user, and so on. This is the binary path, this is the command line, all sort of system. Then EDRs also monitor file access. They may monitor read activity. They may monitor write. They may monitor read write both, or they may monitor syscalls like stat sort of things. Then privilege manipulation. Maybe you are trying to add a new user, or you are trying to modify a group membership of certain user, or maybe you are trying to uh, give certain user more privilege than already configured, or maybe you are trying to give a completely different set of privileges. So all that activity is monitored in real-time system tracing. And network activity is also included if you are binding to a port, connecting to some remote port, or if you are doing something over domain socket, all that activity is monitored in real time. In memory analysis, we mostly see that if there is a process, it has some address space assigned to it, and then we try to see if we can find something that looks malicious in the process memory. This is basically Yara. If you have used Yara, you probably already know this memory analysis. The only difference is that Yara rules are run on contents of memory instead of contents of a file. And this anomaly detection is basically again back to that statistical analysis or some sort of machine learning based heuristics. Then use case creation. So this is generally used in threat hunting sort of activities where you basically create bunch of hypotheses saying that given this particular infrastructure, there are these many possible ways using some hypothetical vulnerabilities to gain access to this part of infra in this particular manner, and then you try to write some sort of detection rules or some sort of queries that will figure out if something like that has been seen in the past or not. Then they also integrate with other services. These services may include like VirusTotal, where you can simply pass a file to VirusTotal, or maybe you can pass only its hash and see it has been reported somewhere else as well, or these EDRs also integrate with various other tools like Splunk or something similar to them. Now, this is something that people who are involved in building EDR software, they can relate. That if you go back to here and you try to see, try to write certain rules, and you think that okay, now I have some sort of rules that will flag this much of malicious activity, and if something is flagged, this is pretty much definitely is malicious activity. For example, we can take example of this one, Apache or Nginx modifying PAM configuration in Linux. You write a rule on this, and then you feel happy that okay, now I will be able to uncover one more attack. But then someone in your customer base will be using the very same thing for some routine work. You will say that hey, spawning bash shell from web server is not really a good idea, and they will be like, no, we are doing it since 10 years. And no, we are not going to change our process. We are going to spawn bash from Nginx, and this is your job to silence your EDR on this particular alert. And when you disable that alert, down the line they get breached. The attacker somehow is able to trigger bash shell from Apache that gets ignored, and then that customer will come back to you saying that hey, your EDR is useless. You were unable to detect this particular attack. So this is something that keeps happening in EDR. Now we come to detection pipeline. There are two parts. One is red team, one is blue team, and blue team will mostly deal with setting up EDR, configuring it, and monitoring it. And then you will involve someone for red teaming activity. And what they do, they will start with the project. They will own everything. They will gain access to your domain controller. They will capture your radius servers. They will capture your identity access management. All sort of things they will capture, and then you will get a report saying that hey, we were able to access this. And for recommendation, you just need to log activity X, and by logging that and analyzing that, you will be able to detect Y. Now there is a problem with this particular recommendation, and the problem is this. The red teamer is asking you to draw, you ask the red teamer that, hey, teach me how to draw an owl. And then the red teamer gives you a rough layout that I have shown in left side. And then he says that, hey, this is the starting part, this is the template, and then draw rest of the fucking owl. Now that draw rest of the goddamn owl is the difficult part that your red teamer has conveniently left out of the recommendation. That is the exact problematic stuff with this particular recommendation, and this is why these recommendations cannot really be enforced in practical life. Now, the problem with logging something at scale is that it will create ridiculously huge amount of data, out of which most of it will be completely noise. For example, someone may ask you to record all the file access on across entire file system to see which process is accessing which file, to figure out if some unauthorized process managed to access some other critical file. Now this looks good on paper, but if you try to pull this off, it will create GBs and GBs of garbage noise that you have to discard. There will be lots and lots of entries saying that hey, this process is accessing ld.s, so that process is accessing glibc.s, so that process is accessing something else, and then your actual attack will be completely hidden in this particular noise, and you will be back to the same problem that how to figure out that needle in this haystack. And now, since you are generating way too much noise, chances of missing something malicious becomes pretty high, and this is one another reason why breaches happen and they are not uncovered in time. So detection pipeline is basically you collect a lot of raw data, then you filter it, as in you remove the noise, you get some smaller subset of data that you determine that okay, now I will analyze this part to see if I can find something fishy. And then you create alerts based on that filter data and analysis. Now, when we talk about common visibility sources, it can be at kernel level, as in some EDR may decide to install a kernel driver, or it may decide to install a Linux security module, or it may be at user level. Maybe it can connect to Linux audit subsystem. Maybe it is using eBPF to capture data, or it is using the file system event notification, that is FA notified. Then there are other ways. This one is actually similar to how many antiviruses used to work on Windows by injecting some DRL into every process. This is Linux counterpart of same technique, where you create a shared object and you try to load it into every process that is going to start. And since your shared object is inside pretty much every process, then you can grab all the data by hitting a bunch of functions and pass to regent process, which will pass it back to the central server. Or maybe you can control the dynamic linker directly. Maybe you can pass it, so you can force it to load your shared object, or you can deal with LD payload or LD write path. Or maybe you can set the variables using PAM. There are multiple ways to do this. Now we come to detection parameters. When we, for example, if we talk about process execution, so with process execution, there will be data about the path that is being executed, the path of the binary file. There will be command line. There will be which user and group own this file. There will be which is the effective user and group. Now there is a difference between owner and effective. And the difference is just, suppose we talk about that ls command. So ls command can be owned by someone else, but if I run it without sudo, it will run under my non-root user. So the owner will be root, but effective user will be the user I am using to log in. Same goes for group as well. Now, apart from this, there will be process tree, which basically shows its parents up to system D process or whatever PID one is being used. And many ADRs will also log hash of process binary, or maybe whatever files are open with it, or whatever shared objects are loaded inside it, and so on. On file system access, there will be path, there will be access type, there will be the process that is trying to perform the operation and its process details similar to this, and user and group information about the file. For network access, again, it is trivial. There will be IP and port information, remote host information, operation protocol, process that is trying to perform operation, and again, all the process details from this one, and the user and group. For privileges manipulation, current user information, process information, PAM parameters. Now, these are a bunch of prevention mechanisms. At kernel level, you need Linux security modules. No, you cannot hook syscalls starting from kernel 5.0 onwards. Before that, it used to kind of sort of work, but now it totally doesn't. So there is no point trying that particular method. If you want to block from kernel end, you need Linux security modules, and these cannot be loaded and unloaded dynamically. You have to put this in kernel source tree, compile the whole kernel with your Linux security module attached to it, and then you can use it. Middleware level, you basically use LD audit or LD preload, load your shared object, and then you use your shared object to hook bunch of functions, whatever functions are interesting to you. Then you can try seccomp profiling via PAM. Now this seccomp profiling can be applied using multiple ways. PAM is only one of it. This seccomp one we will be covering in upcoming lectures in pretty solid depth. Now at user level, there is something called FA notify that gives you some mechanism to allow and deny certain types of file accesses. Then there are some new security modules that are being added to Linux kernel, and hopefully by the time I am ready for next session, this will be already merged in kernel mainline. Then we can talk about those particular security modules and how to use them in detail. Now we are here for the limitations. Now, if we are talking about visibility from kernel level, for example, I attach my handler at system called trace points. So trace points are basically special probes in the kernel where you can attach your own code. So suppose I want to monitor all the OpenSys calls. So what I will do that I will write my small tracing code and I will attach it to trace point for OpenSys call. Now, whenever any process in the user space calls that OpenSys call, kernel will call my trace function, and once my trace function is over, the original syscall will be called. Here, I do not have any option to block the syscall execution. As soon as I exit, return value does not matter. Kernel is going to execute that OpenSys call. The problem is that this is going to be completely dependent on kernel version. And when I say kernel version, I don't mean that if you write against kernel 5.4, for example, it will work on every distribution that is running version 5.4. This is not the way Linux works in reality. So if you target Ubuntu, you target Fedora, CentOS, IHEL, and bunch of other systems, even if some of them are using kernel 5.4, the patch level may be different, kernel compile time parameters may be different, runtime parameters may be different. So you have to take into account all that stuff. Ideally, you have to compile your kernel level drivers, which is attaching code to these trace points against all these distributions in kernel versions that you are planning to support. So this quickly becomes way too painful to do practically unless you have too much money and an army of kernel people to do with this stuff. Now, for secure Linux security modules, again, this needs to be compiled in source tree of target kernel. So if you say that we are going to support Ubuntu, you need to download the kernel source that is being used by that particular version of Ubuntu. Then you have to put your security module in its source tree, then compile everything again, and then you have to distribute your kernel package to all of your customers, saying that, hey, on Ubuntu, you have to install this particular kernel. Only then our EDR is going to work, because it cannot be loaded or unloaded dynamically. So again, this becomes a pretty huge problem, not because that you have to compile with bunch of kernels for bunch of distros every time you make any change, but the problem becomes that once you replace the kernel package, you have to deal with all the updates that are coming to the kernel. So every time Ubuntu is going to push an update in kernel package, you have to do all this dance again. So again, that is way too much effort. Then there are some provisions at user mode. The most famous one is Linux audit subsystem. This is so famous that I think most of you have already used this in some capacity at least. Maybe you are using audit daemon, that is reading this audit data and writing in a log file, or maybe you are forwarding this log to some tool, say Splunk or ArcSight, or maybe your EDR agent is reading this data directly to figure out whatever activity is going on in the system. Now, if you do not want to use audit, this Linux audit subsystem, there is another provision called extended Berkeley packet filter. But the problem is that it is useful for EDR purposes specifically, only in rather recent kernels starting from 4.18 and above. Below that, there is eBPF, but it is not powerful and mature enough, as in you will not get that much data from older kernels using this particular route. And since you don't get a lot of juicy data, you can't really use this particular approach for your EDR stuff. The tooling used to be dependent upon LLVM and Python, but that is changing slowly. We have some tooling that generates compiled binary directly, so you don't have to install LLVM infrastructure on every endpoint. You don't have to write eBPF code in Python and then put these two dependencies for your agent. Now Python is not problematic, but this LLVM will easily take around 500, 600 MB of space just for this eBPF compilation on demand stuff. So that used to be a pain point, but it is improving slowly. Now, third problem is that eBPF is pretty raw. For example, there are way too many limitations in eBPF. For example, it is not really Turing complete. You can't write, say, an infinite loop. Even looping is very, very limited. You can't run arbitrary code inside eBPF. So there are a bunch of limitations, and because of that, writing eBPF code directly is rather hard. The existence of libraries is pretty recent. In I think last couple of years, we are slowly seeing bunch of helper libraries for eBPF that you can use directly and write code on top of it. And finally, there is a limitation of size as well, that your eBPF code cannot be bigger than this. So that too is slowly improving. Now we have file system event notification, that is also called FA notify on Linux. But then there are limitations that if file system is mounted over network, it is not going to catch the event. For example, if you mount some assembly file share in Linux, access on that particular share will not go through this particular notification system. Similarly, if you do, say, SSH file system, again, that will not go through this file system event notification. If files are being accessed by memory mapping, again, this event notification will not see it. And finally, the last one is a pain point. For example, if you start monitoring a particular directory, so the problem is that if someone creates a subdirectory inside this one, that subdirectory is not monitored automatically. So you have to monitor for changes in subdirectory, and then you have to handle that to add them in monitoring or remove them from monitoring as needed. Recently, this was improved in kernel, I think 5.0, if my memory serves right, where you can monitor the whole file system tree without having to monitor directory creation and removal. But that too has limitations that you have to mount at, you have to monitor from mount point itself. You can't say that if some particular device is mounted, for example, a USB device is mounted and you do not want to monitor whole USB, you only want to monitor one of the folders, that is not really going to work. It will monitor entire USB partition in that way. So there are certain pain points that we will cover when we will deal with the coding part. Then middleware level for shared object injection. This is not going to work with the statically linked binaries because they do not involve your dynamic linker, that LD.so stuff. And if there is some binary that is using some non-standard linker instead of using LD.so, again, this is not really going to work. Now, another method is to control the dynamic linker directly. Maybe you can patch it or you can hook it something. Again, these two limitations hold true for this particular case as well. Then there are some other blind spots. For example, if you are working with some soft teams, maybe you already have experience that most of the rules are either on process tree or on command line. That if this process is starting, this is the command line, give an alert. If this process starts this particular process, give me an alert. And the problem is that both of these are really brittle. They cannot be heavily relied upon. File integrity monitoring is pretty hard. File integrity monitoring is basically this one or any other mechanism where you monitor a specific file or set of files for access. Now, the problem is that multiple paths can point to same file in a file system. For example, you can have assembly to a file at multiple places. You can you can basically mirror your file system at some different place and access from there. You can perform some mount bind operations and then access from there. And then finally, many file systems do not support event notification. For example, if you mount assembly files share, or you mount some remote server directory using SSHFS or something like that. Now, if you monitor system calls, the problem is that processes tend to inherit a lot of things. So if there is a parent process, it spawns a child process. A lot of stuff will be inherited by child process, which is coming from parent process. Now, this set of detail is something that we will see in upcoming sessions, but we will try to replicate this particular activity and we will see how much stuff is being copied in both processes. Now, some may decide that we can detect shell environment variables like LD payload, LD audit, LD library path for potential shared object injection. So that is not really reliable because injected code can delete the environment variable after it is loaded. So this is another limitation. And since we have some type of blind spots right now, we can see how these can be abused. So we start with command line argument. And this is basically a fact that a lot of detections are dependent upon this command line arguments, and they are assuming that this particular piece of data will remain intact. So for example, take this sample detection that is copied from certain EDR. Now here I am not going to take name of any particular EDR product. It is basically comparative study of bunch of EDR solutions that support Linux. And without taking names, I have selected bunch of techniques that work on these EDRs. So I will only share the techniques. I will not tell you which EDRs I have tested, and I will also not tell you that which particular technique works on this particular EDR on this particular platform. So that part is left as an exercise for you. So this is a sample detection copied from somewhere, and this rule was for persistence using the cron job. So there are many ways to add a cron job. You can add entries in the cron file directly, or you can use this particular command line. This basically runs cron tab and asks is to write whatever it is getting on its standard input into the corresponding user's cron file. So the way it is used, that you put some command that will output whatever contents you want to put inside the cron job, and then you pipe it to this particular command line. So then cron tab starts. Since its input is redirected, it gets all that data on standard input, and then it will happily write all that data into the user's cron file. So there was a rule, and this is the sample detection, saying this is the event, this is the PID, path, command line, yada yada. And for example, say I do not want this particular rule to match. That is checking for that command line should be equal to cron tab space hyphen. So there are common techniques. Some are very obvious. For example, I can copy this cron tab file with some other name, and then I can run that particular file with this syntax and be done with it. This rule will not trigger on that one. Or I can create a symlink with different name. Or I can use utilities which can act like other utilities, like BGBox. That is another implementation of GNU utilities inside one binary. Toybox and GOW are similar to BGBox. So basically, with this, you instead of writing this cron tab space hyphen, you write BGBox space cron tab space hyphen and be done with it. And again, this particular check fails. Then there are utilities which can run other binaries For example, ld.so and systemd run. ld.so is your dynamic linker. You can use this to run another ELF file. And systemd run is a utility from systemd that actually exists to allow you to apply certain seccomp profile on some other process. That is its intended use, but then you can mess with it in a way that it will allow you to basically run pretty much anything with pretty much no limitation. So this part will be covered when I will cover that seccomp profile thing in depth. Then we will come back to the systemd run thing to see how it works and what are its limitations and why exactly this particular technique works with this one and bunch of other techniques as well. So all these will come back in upcoming lectures. Now we come to process tree. Now here, another significant part of detection, apart from this command line arguments, depends upon the process tree, where you see that which process is being started by which process. For example, if bash is getting spawned from, say, SSH daemon, it is probably okay because someone probably logged in over SSH. But if it is spawning from, say, Nginx or Apache or, say, MySQL server, then it is not really okay. So that sort of thing. So again, this is a sample detection copied from some other EDR. And here we see that it is saying that parent process is Nginx and the path is bash. Command line is something like this. Basically, there is some command OS command execution sort of bug, and using that some payload is being downloaded. Now to evade from this, again there are a bunch of techniques. We can either ask some other process to do this part for us instead of starting from a web server. So for that, we can either add a cron entry, or we can add a system service, or we can perform code injection using ld.so.preload configuration file, or maybe we can patch the dynamic linker again here, or maybe we can add PAM module to inject shared object in entire user session. Whatever process starts there, object will be inserted, or we can use ptrace attached to another process, inject our code, and start another process from there. Now again, all these techniques will be covered in depth in later, not today. Other techniques involve poisoning dynamic linker cache. This dynamic linker basically creates a cache of metadata of whatever shared objects you have in your system. So instead of looking for files on your file system, it simply reads its cache file and loads the corresponding shared object directly. So if I poison it, for that I can either add my entry, or I can override some existing entry and make it to point to some other file that I control. That way my object will be loaded inside another process without having to rely upon LD preload thing. And this patching the dynamic linker thing is something that we are seeing in actual malware. So it is not really a hypothetical sort of case. That malware will also be covered. So for today's overview, I think this much is enough for you to take today and digest it, maybe read some more about it by the time, so that by the time I am ready with coding part around these techniques, so you already have some decent understanding about it. So any questions so far from anyone?
जी मिश्रा जी, हमारे पास कुछ क्वेश्चंस हैं।
हाँ बोलिए।
चैट में one is will we cover Windows EDRs in future?
In this series, no. In another series, maybe.
Okay. For every update in EDR, For every update, the EDR has to be custom written again for that particular version.
No, I didn't get the question.
Mr. Dev Prasad Banerjee, can you please unmute yourself and please ask the question, because even I'm not able to understand what this question actually is.
So you mentioned that the kernel, for any upgrade in the kernel, the EDR has to be written again customly for the kernel version.
No. Most of the time you have to compile the code again for that.
Okay. Will the slides be provided later on?
Yes, I will share the slides with you and Manishji. You can share it ahead.
Okay. No problem. Anything else? I cannot see anything else in chat. Okay, there is one. EDR solutions. What is your take? What is your take on EDR solutions? No, EDR solutions, I mean.
The question is not really clear. So are you asking me whether I like EDR solutions, or whether I am in favor of installing EDR solutions, or something else?
Most probably it is whether which EDR is one of the better ones, kind of.
Probably.
And you need not to answer that question. It is not
Yes.
mandatory.
Yes.
We understand that you belong from that industry, so you can skip that.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I can't really answer.
Yes, that would be better.
Okay, fair enough. So there is Mr. Captain here. He is requesting for some good resources to learn more about these terms.
One way will be to keep an eye on latest malware and analyze them to see what they are doing for defense evasion. Otherwise, I don't see any ready-made repository covering all that stuff. So the reason why I finally decided to collect some material and discuss these techniques in a bit depth, because there is no organized material anywhere that I can see. Apart from that, you can take a look into whatever malwares are coming these days.
Okay, from defense evasion perspective, I had one question. So there are few techniques. If we go towards the defense evasion ones in the meter attack framework, like obfuscated files or information, file detect, deletion, scripting, masquerading, or regs of 32 run DLL, disabling secure tools, and process injection. So why these are the most successful and used defense evasion techniques in terms of malwares, or for the attackers, and not the others? Is there any kind of difficulty from the EDR side getting it detected, or is it just a default case or chosen by the attackers?
It is generally taken in use by attackers, because most of the attackers are rather lame. Most of them are like wannabe hackers, script kiddies, who just happen to have a bunch of tools written by someone else, and they shoot their cannon everywhere. So that is one part. Another part is that detecting the defense evasion techniques in MITRE ATT&CK framework is far easier than detecting whatever we are going to cover in the series. Detecting that some malware is disabling some firewall or some monitoring system or some particular EDR agent sort of thing is far easier than trying to figure out if your linker got patched, or if your kernel image itself has been patched somehow, or if something else is going on inside the kernel. So MITRE ATT&CK framework is mostly on how to look good in EDR land. It is merely a checklist where you can tick and say, hey, we cover all that stuff. But the reality is that as soon as you end up with some semi-targeted attack, you will see a lot of techniques where detection becomes almost impossible.
So those attack techniques will most probably not be listed in meter attack framework.
Correct.
Okay. And secondly, they will be very difficult to detect from the EDR perspective also.
Correct.
Okay. So
yeah, please go ahead.
please continue.
No, there was one more question which I am seeing here. LD preload allows the linker to bind symbols provided by certain libraries before other libraries.
Correct.
This is correct, yes. So how LD preload will be utilized in EDR functionality? Could you give any practical examples?
Yes, for example, if I am writing an EDR, I can write my own shared object where I am hooking certain function calls. Say I hook execv function call that is defined in glibc, which is basically a wrapper on execv syscall, or I can hook the system function, or I can hook the popen function. So these are a bunch of ways to create a process from C code on Linux. So if I hook them in my shared object, and my shared object is loaded inside most of the processes, then from those I get the detail that this particular process is trying to execute this particular function. So if I see that Apache is calling execv on some binary where I do not want it to execute, so I can simply ask my shared object to return permission denied error and do nothing else. So this is one example how it is done.
I hope that answers your question. Okay, any other best stuff related to this topic for a fresher?
Well, this comes under forbidden knowledge, so there is no documented collection, unfortunately. Stay tuned for this series. I hope that you will learn a bunch of things.
And the last one says, will we see any practical session related to EDR in the coming sessions?
Yes, there will be hands-on stuff from next session. I didn't want to put a lot of code stuff in first session itself. I wanted to give a small lightweight overview first, but from second session, we will be seeing a lot of hands-on stuff as well. Basically, reference implementations of various EDR techniques. We will see LD preload based as well. We will see eBPF stuff as well, and we will see their defense evasion part as well. And then we will analyze both codes together to see why exactly it fails. I will not be demonstrating actual EDR. I will make some reference implementations based on observed behavior of certain EDRs, and then we will do other stuff on that reference implementation.
Okay, so that's it, what I can see in the chat window. I cannot see any other question out here. Can we make this type of pipeline for web app testing? Web app testing?
I'm not sure how it is related to web app testing. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how it is related to web apps. So, okay. Yeah, no more questions in the chat as I can see. And
okay,
yeah,
I have a question. I see a question in chat right now. I want to start my career in EDR. Any suggestions? Well, are you planning to start your career in EDR development or something else?
You can unmute yourself, Pooja. You can unmute yourself and please ask up your query if it is.
Yeah, hello, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Actually, I want to join in company on the base for post of PDR. So that's why I want to ask. I'm fresher, and I want to ask that what was the basic topics we need to complete for starting my career in ADR.
Well, I will say easiest way will be to learn malware analysis and go that way. So there are a lot of EDR companies which have whole army of malware analysts. We keep analyzing latest malware to see whatever is going on, and then they try to write detections for it. So writing detection part is something that is specific to EDR. When you join the company, generally you are given some sort of hands-on training on how to write detection logic for that particular EDR, but you need to know malware analysis part already. So that will be easiest route. If you want to go directly into development of EDR as in programming side of things, then it becomes really tricky because you need to know whatever language they are using for writing their EDR. Maybe it is C, maybe C++, maybe bunch of other languages, depending upon which piece of EDR we are talking about. And then you need to understand security side of things as well. And this combination becomes a little bit difficult to handle. So easiest method to enter is malware analysis one, and then you can start learning about programming, and maybe you can try switching internally to development side of things. I have one more question. Could you please share a payment option where we can donate for this good cause? I'm not sure if we are taking donations. Maybe
No,
ask.
no, we are not open for
Yeah,
donation.
we are not taking up donations as of now.
So thank you very much for your interest, but we are not into that as of.
Okay, I think this would be the last question. The question is, why are we relying on LD preload? Because we can still use R path and LD library path options. Why do we rely on LD preload?
For R path, you have to patch the ELF file that you are trying to monitor. So that is a bad idea. LD library path, yes, you can use that, but the difference is that LD preload will allow you to load a specific shared object, individual file as well. With LD library path, you are basically over riding the whole default path where your linker is going to search for libraries. So we can say that LD preload gives you more fine-grained control on which shared objects will be injected than LD library path, but yes, both of them can be used.
Okay, so that's it as I can see in the chat window.
So
There is nothing else.
one question I think Pooja asked us, any good companies for EDR where she can apply.
Good company for EDR? No, this is not something that I can really answer. You can try whichever company, whatever company interests you.
So it is very easy. You can look for the companies which are involved in EDR development or malware analysis, and you can apply there for initials. And there are market leaders. You can look for that, or else you can apply to his organization also. There is no restriction to it too.
Now, I don't know why all the questions are coming up for LD preload thing, but again, what is the difference between LD preload and LD run path? LD run path is for compile.
LD run path, that I have to check. Wait. I'm not sure if it is shell environment variable. Wait. That is for compile time as far as I can see.
Yes. Compile
So,
time, baking and linking.
yeah, so that is not really useful for EDR. For EDR, we
Correct.
need something that works in runtime.
So are there any more questions available with us? I don't think so.
No, I
So-
cannot see. Yes.
So before leaving, I would request everyone to be available in the next session, which will be happening at the last Saturday next month. To continue understanding the in depth of the EDR, and also request you all to do follow us on at least YouTube and Telegram and other social media platforms. I think that will be all from my side. Anything else would you like to add, Mr. Ji?
No, not really. Maybe I will share a small list of tools that that attendees can install in a way to follow the code, because I will be sharing whatever source code I will show probably in a GitHub repository or maybe as a zip file. So if everyone has close enough virtual machines to try them, that will be really good. So I will share the details about whatever tools are required in the virtual machine.
Sure. So all these details will be available on our Telegram platform. So anybody who has joined those groups or channels will be able to see it.